Lisa had always considered herself a night owl, so when she got the job as a security officer for a large, deserted storage warehouse, she thought it would be an easy way to make some extra money. All she had to do was sit in front of the security monitors and make sure nothing out of the ordinary happened. She figured it would be boring, maybe even peaceful, just her, the screens, and the echoing silence of the empty warehouse. But as her shifts passed, she began to sense something off. It wasn't just the vast, lonely aisles lined with crates and boxes. It was the feeling that she wasn't alone. It started subtle at first, the tiniest shiver running up her spine when she turned her back on the long, dark aisles. But that sensation became harder to ignore, and soon, she realized, something was watching her. Lisa, in her mid-20s, wasn't the type to scare easily. She had grown up in a rough neighborhood, where survival often depended on staying calm in stressful situations. She was used to working late shifts, and she had always liked the quiet solitude of nighttime. But the warehouse? It was different. The cold, artificial light cast long shadows, and the stillness of the building felt like it was alive, like the warehouse was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. She often told herself it was all in her head, just paranoia from the long, lonely hours. Still, she couldn't shake the sense of unease that gnawed at her. Every creak of the metal shelves, every flicker of the security cameras made her heart race. But as the nights wore on, it became impossible to deny. Someone or something was in there with her. One night, just past midnight, Lisa saw it for the first time. She was scanning the camera feeds, mindlessly watching the flickering images of the warehouse's dimly lit aisles, when she noticed movement in the far corner. She leaned closer to the screen, squinting, but the figure had already disappeared into the shadows. She rewound the footage, but it was gone, like it had never been there at all. Her stomach tightened with fear, but she brushed it off. It was probably just her imagination, she told herself. The next night, the figure returned, closer this time. It moved quickly, just out of range of the camera's focus, a tall shadow sliding between the rows of boxes. Lisa's throat went dry, and she immediately called her supervisor, asking if anyone was supposed to be in the building. The answer was no. She wasn't even supposed to be there. They told her to stay put and keep an eye on things. But the figure didn't stop appearing. By her sixth night, Lisa's nerves were frayed. She was jumpy, paranoid. Every shift felt like she was stepping into a nightmare. As she sat in the security office, staring at the dark, grainy footage on the monitors, the door to the office creaked open. Slowly, deliberately, Lisa's heart pounded in her chest. She whipped around, expecting to see a coworker or maybe a prankster, but the doorway was empty. Her pulse raced as she slowly approached the door, her flashlight trembling in her hand. She stepped into the hallway, and the cold air hit her like a wave. There was no one there. But then she heard it, the sound of footsteps, soft, shuffling footsteps coming from the far end of the corridor. Her breath hitched as the shadow reappeared at the edge of her vision, closer, clearer than before. It wasn't human. It couldn't be. Lisa ran back into the office, slamming the door shut behind her. She locked it, her hands shaking, and watched the monitors in horror as the figure approached the door. It was tall, its limbs unnaturally long, and its eyes glowed a faint, sickly yellow. The door handle jiggled. She backed away, her heart hammering in her chest, but the door didn't open. Just as she thought the figure would break through, everything stopped. The handle stilled, the footsteps faded, and the shadow on the monitor disappeared. Lisa sat in stunned silence, unable to comprehend what had just happened. She quit the job the next day, unable to handle the thought of spending another night in that warehouse. Months later, she learned that the warehouse had been built on top of a burial ground, something the company never mentioned. The workers had uncovered old graves during construction, and many believed that the spirits of those buried there had been disturbed. Lisa couldn't say for sure what she saw, but she knew one thing: she would never set foot in that place again. Working the night shift in a hospital might sound like a normal, quiet job, but for Jake, the janitor, the basement was something different altogether. Hospitals, by nature, are places of life and death, places where emotions run high and energy lingers. Jake had always felt it, the cold, oppressive weight of the hospital's basement, where the forgotten equipment was stored and where most people rarely ventured. It was just supposed to be an old basement, but something about it was wrong, and soon, Jake realized just how wrong it was. Jake had been working at St. Mary's Hospital for almost 7 years. He was a practical man in his mid-30s who had seen more than his share of death and tragedy in the halls of the hospital, cleaning up after surgeries, mopping blood-stained floors, and handling medical waste. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. Jake had always believed that the dead were just dead. No ghosts, no spirits, just bodies that stopped working. But the hospital basement? It made him question everything. For most of his career, Jake worked the day shifts, but due to staffing shortages, he was switched to nights. That's when things changed. The basement was a labyrinth of corridors, old gurneys, and dusty medical equipment that had been stored away long ago. It was cold, damp, and filled with the eerie hum of the building's old pipes. And at night, it became a place of nightmares. The first time Jake heard the whispers, he had been working in the old morgue. He was mopping the floors, minding his own business, when he heard it, soft voices, barely audible, like children giggling in the distance. He stopped, listening intently, but the sound was gone. Figuring it was just the old pipes making noise, he continued his work, but the whispering continued, growing louder as the night went on. By the time his shift was over, Jake was on edge. The basement, with its flickering lights and echoing halls, felt like it was alive. He told himself it was just his imagination, just the eerie quiet of the night messing with his head. But as the nights went on, the whispering grew more frequent, and it wasn't just in the morgue anymore. The voices followed him down every corridor, echoing through the walls like they were trapped inside. One night, Jake was mopping near the old storage room when he felt it, a cold hand on his shoulder. His heart leapt into his throat, and he spun around, expecting to see a doctor or nurse. But no one was there. The corridor was empty, the lights flickering overhead. He tried to shake it off, but the fear clung to him like a second skin. He was sure of what he felt. Someone, or something, had touched him. That night, as he finished his shift, Jake walked by the morgue one last time. He heard the soft laughter again, coming from behind the locked doors. His heart raced, but he couldn't bring himself to open them. The next morning, he asked one of the older nurses about the morgue, and she gave him a knowing look. "You're not the first one," she said quietly. "That place has a history." The following night, Jake worked his last shift in the basement. As he mopped the dimly lit halls, the whispering began again, louder than before, almost urgent. It echoed off the walls, coming from every direction. His hands trembled as he hurried to finish his work. But before he could leave, he heard it again, a soft, childlike giggle, followed by the sound of footsteps behind him. Jake's blood ran cold as he turned around. Standing at the end of the hallway was a small figure. A little girl, no older than 8, dressed in a hospital gown. Her eyes were hollow, her skin pale and translucent. She stared at Jake for what felt like an eternity before slowly raising her hand and beckoning him to come closer. Jake backed away, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. He ran. He didn't stop running until he was out of the hospital, his heart pounding in his chest. He never returned to the basement after that night. Some said the little girl had died in the hospital decades ago, her body forgotten in the chaos of an old epidemic. But Jake knew one thing for sure. Whatever haunted that basement wasn't resting in peace. Marcus had always loved the solitude of his night shifts at the gas station. The small, roadside station in the middle of nowhere was usually quiet after dark. The occasional trucker would pull in for gas, maybe a late-night traveler in need of a quick snack or bathroom break. But otherwise, the nights were uneventful, or so he thought, until the night that changed everything. Marcus, a man in his early 40s, had been working at the gas station for nearly 5 years. He liked the peace and quiet of the night shift. It gave him time to think, to reflect on his life. He had no family to speak of, and his friends had all moved on, leaving him with his solitary existence. He didn't mind, though. The station was his home away from home, and the night was his companion. But there was something about the stretch of road that led to the station that always unnerved him. It was an old highway, winding through desolate fields and forests, and at night, it felt like the road led to nowhere. On more than one occasion, Marcus had felt like he was being watched, though he could never pinpoint from where. It was a chilly autumn night when the strange events began. Marcus had just finished stocking the shelves and was settling into his routine when he noticed something unusual on the security camera feed. A car was parked at one of the pumps, but no one had gotten out. He waited, thinking the driver was just taking a break. But after several minutes, the car remained still, its engine off and lights dim. Curious, Marcus stepped outside to investigate. As he approached the vehicle, his breath visible in the cold air, he noticed that the car's windows were fogged up from the inside. He knocked on the driver's side window, but there was no response. Cautiously, he tried the handle, but the door was locked. He peered inside and saw nothing. No driver, no passengers. The car was completely empty. Confused, Marcus stepped back, his heart racing. He hadn't seen anyone leave the car. It was as if the driver had vanished into thin air. He returned to the station, trying to shake the unease that clung to him like a shadow. As the night wore on, things only got stranger. The car remained at the pump, untouched, and Marcus couldn't stop thinking about it. Around 2 a.m., the lights in the station began to flicker. At first, he thought it was a power surge, but then the flickering became more erratic. The air in the station grew thick, oppressive, as if something unseen was pressing down on him. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement. A figure, tall, thin, and shrouded in darkness, was standing at the edge of the gas station's lot, just beyond the reach of the lights. Marcus blinked, and the figure was gone. His pulse quickened, fear gnawing at the edges of his mind. He tried to tell himself it was just his imagination, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger with each passing minute. The phone rang suddenly, the shrill sound cutting through the silence like a knife. Marcus jumped, his hands trembling as he answered. But there was no one on the other end, just static, followed by a faint, whispering voice. "Don't look outside," the voice said. Marcus slammed the phone down, his heart pounding in his chest. Panicked, Marcus glanced at the security monitors, and his blood ran cold. The figure was back, standing directly in front of the station's entrance. It was closer now, its features still obscured by the darkness, but Marcus could see its eyes, glowing faintly in the night. He backed away, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The door to the station rattled as if someone, or something, was trying to get in. In a frenzy, Marcus grabbed the baseball bat he kept behind the counter and rushed to the door. But when he threw it open, the figure was gone. The lot was empty, the night still and quiet once more. He looked over at the pump where the car had been parked, but it, too, had disappeared. There were no tire tracks, no signs that anyone had been there at all. The rest of the night passed in a blur of fear and paranoia. Marcus didn't sleep when he got home. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, watching him, waiting. He quit the job a few days later, unable to face another night at that gas station. Some say the road leading to the station was cursed, that travelers who passed through after dark were never seen again. Marcus didn't care about the stories. All he knew was that something had found him that night, and it was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to return.